an overwhelming reaction from listeners today to these new government restrictions that have been announced. Nigel, folk are very, very angry out there. The view seems to be, how on earth can the government limit meeting with our family or maybe a small group of friends when they are allowing mass demonstrations by the likes of the Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter movement?
Well, absolutely. And not just those two. What about the raves? What about thousands of people who've been meeting up on beaches, in woodlands? And this has been going on in a very, very significant way. It's funny, isn't it? There was a demonstration in Dover that took place a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure there were one or two thugs amongst it. 100 people turned up. There were 12 arrests. You then look at mass gatherings where we've seen, national monuments defaced, and barely anyone gets arrested or charged. So I think there's a feeling amongst the law-abiding majority that we've become very weak on some sections of the community and tough on others. And I have to say that I think this new, limit of 6 people that can meet up, that comes in from Monday and will be law, I think people are going to break it wholesale. I think the government, frankly, has lost respect on this.
Kim Rennie had messaged to say Boris has reached his poll tax moment. I mean, if people are going to start ignoring the restrictions, do you think perhaps there could be that sort of loss of faith from the public?
Well, this has been going on now for over 6 months, and we keep being made a series of promises that will have a world-class test and trace scheme. It'll be in place in 2 weeks' time, and we find that it's a complete and utter flop. And today we're told with the Prime Minister there's going to be this big moonshot at mass testing, and we just don't believe what he's saying anymore. We look at government ministers who appear to be pretty incompetent, people with no real experience of the world. We've had rules on quarantine, rules on restriction that virtually no one you asked actually understood. So, government beginning to lose the respect of the people. I guess the only thing that's really saving the Conservative government at the moment is they're taking a tough line on Brexit, and a lot of their voters do like that.
Yeah, no, of course, and I will come to that in just one moment, Nigel, of course. But at the same time, we should be looking at the science. And the problem is the science doesn't necessarily back up these more draconian restrictions at the moment, because estimations back in March actually suggest that 100,000 people at one time had the virus every day, right? Were testing positive for coronavirus every day. It's just simply that there was no mass testing regime, so they weren't able to be properly tracked. So is it not inevitable that, of course, the case numbers are rising now because there is the beginnings of a mass testing regime?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, from day one, Boris told us we're following the science. And I thought, well, that's laughable, because get 2 scientists in a room and you'll find 2 or 3 different opinions. So there is no great consensus among scientists around virtually anything. They're always challenging the ideas that the other puts forward. All I can say is this. When COVID first came on the scene, I was nervous about it. It was new. We didn't know what we were dealing with. I did not disagree with locking down in the first place. But now we understand more about it. We understand better how to treat it. And you're quite right. More people are being diagnosed because of more testing. The numbers of those who are dying on a daily basis, is down to the same as the number of road deaths every couple of days. It's horrible. It's not great, but we've got to put it into some sense of perspective. Fewer and fewer people going into hospital, going into intensive care. I know people who've died having had this virus. I know people who've been very ill through this virus, but equally, the same could be argued for, winter flu and many other conditions. And I think we've really got to a point where the government is putting the precautionary principle above the long-term well-being of the country. And by that I mean, it's becoming clearer and clearer that whilst some of the big firms are prospering through COVID, many of the small self-employed people are having a truly, genuinely miserable time. And so once again, we see the gap between the rich and the poor getting wider. We see the gap between those with private education and state education getting wider. And we see a country that needs to be told, however difficult this is, we've got to get on with the rest of our lives. If you are in one of the vulnerable groups, I'm sorry, but you are going to have to isolate yourself to a certain extent. But we can't close the whole country down to protect those that may be at risk. We just cannot go on doing it. And I fear that these restrictions, these draconian restrictions that are coming in from Monday, are the beginning of another lockdown. And that would be a complete and utter disaster.
Oh, no, we can't go there. We can't go there. But look, as you say, you are happy with the government, at least, about this internal markets bill that overrides parts of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. What do you say to critics who say this defies international law?
Look, when the withdrawal agreement was signed by Boris Johnson last October, he hailed it as a great victory. We've got rid of the backstop. Isn't it all wonderful? And certainly Monsieur Barnier thought it was wonderful, believe you me. They'd rather we weren't leaving the European Union, but they were very happy with what Boris had signed up. Dan, I gave public speeches in London the night afterwards. Right up until the general election, I made clear that the withdrawal agreement and its associated political declaration were inconsistent with us becoming an independent country. It was a truly rotten deal, no better than what Mrs. May had signed before and had rejected 3 times by Parliament. But we kind of had Brexhaustion in the country.
Yep.
We'd had enough of this endless row. And here was a new Prime Minister speaking very optimistically, and people chose to believe him. So the current row that is going on is a mess of the government's own making. They have signed us up to something that effectively could end the United Kingdom functioning as we understand it today. And so they want to renege on that part of the withdrawal agreement. They want to renege on the small print of the fisheries. They want to renege on the small print to do with state aid. And they keep saying now, David Frost, our negotiator, keeps saying, we're going to become an independent country. So I think the government have come to their senses. They must now be realizing the folly of what they pushed through last autumn. They see that they say they were unforeseen circumstances. Well, not with me, they weren't. So look, they've made a blooming mess of it. Going back on an international treaty will not do our reputation on the world stage much good. But if they're going to keep the promise they made to the electorate last December, when the oven-ready deal had morphed into, we really are going to do this, then they have no choice but to turn their backs on large parts of the withdrawal agreement. And I go even further than that. I mean, I spent 25 years campaigning for us to leave the European Union and to leave its associated treaties.
So you would ditch it altogether? You would just ditch the withdrawal agreement altogether?
I didn't want to leave one EU treaty and sign up to a new EU treaty. And that effectively is what the withdrawal agreement is. So I think we're reaching the point where, unless Brussels is prepared to substantially change a lot of it, and I doubt they are, the time may well come for us to ditch it and to say, right, this is how it's going to be. This is how we're going to operate our borders. This is how we are going to allow you access to our fishing waters. When it comes to state aid, do you know what? We'll do what's in our interests, and you're more than welcome to do what you think's in your interests. The problem with that is it would mean there wouldn't be a trade deal by the end of the year, and I fully accept that. However, we could always go, if both parties agreed, to the World Trade Organization, use Article 24 of those rules, and have a period where we carry on with tariff-free trade whilst the WTO act as a neutral broker between the two of us. And I think that, in the end, is where we may have to go.